Welcome to another Peaceful Solution Character Education Certification course. Everyone in the auditorium can be seated. We'd like to welcome all of you that are coming in, welcome all of you that are watching online. Of course, we're going to be back in the second chapter of the Respect unit. And for those of you that might not have one, I know there were some people still emailing in this week asking how they can get one because they're watching on our Peaceful Solution app. But you can download them for free. For those of you that have social media off of Facebook, the official Peaceful Solution Facebook. And if you don't have Facebook, and I'm not faulting anyone for not having Facebook, I would encourage you to not have it unless you're watching class. Then that's great. But you can just email us, and we will send you a link so you can download a PDF copy for yourself. You can print it out, do whatever needs to be done, but you need to have that teacher's manual so you can put your notes in. You know, in the world of digital books, I know there's younger people that like them, but in this class, you really need to put notes and cross-references and link your pages together. We have so many books that we're working with and so many pages, and some of these things are repetition, but a lot of the repetition has just a little bit more added to it from the book before, and there's a little bit more bolder of a statement, and there's kind of a little bit more meat on the bone, so to speak. And it helps put everything together. And that's what we're going to be doing tonight with the second chapter of the Respect unit. And of course, we've been talking about self-respect. William, Catan, and David also covering these things in detail and putting it all together. And of course, self-respect, that builds on self-control because you have to have self-control to develop this self-respect. And we're going to finish up this chapter tonight. If you go back to the lesson plan, David pretty much covered everything but the poem last class, going over the hygiene and the dress code, of course, and of course speaking about self-esteem with optimism and pessimism and how we need to control our thoughts. And that has a huge, it plays a huge role in how we conduct ourselves, whether we're thinking positive thoughts or negative thoughts. And of course, it leads to how we're going to not only take care of ourselves, but how we're going to deal with others. But looking here on LP2, page E, procedure 10, of course, we're going to complete the very last part of it. If you look down to the bottom, it says, respect for myself means, and that's what was covered on page 42. And then listen to the poem entitled Respecting Me from the teacher's manual audio lesson. The poem is found on page 43 of their handbooks. That's for the students. And let them briefly discuss the content. So you're not just going to play the poem or read it. You're going to also have a discussion about it. So turning over to page 43, and for those teachers that request the PDF form, all of these poems, the audio are embedded, the files are embedded into the digital book. So when you're using it, a lot of classrooms, I say most classrooms in the United States, I know a lot of classrooms outside of the United States don't have smart boards, but in the United States, pretty much every classroom has a smart board where you can just touch the file and it will play. But for those of you that are watching in other countries, if you're using the book on your laptop, you can still play the audio file. It's just an MP4. That way you can use it. And for those of you that are in countries that don't have access to those things, you can always read it. You know, that's the old-fashioned way, and that's how we're going to do it tonight. So looking here on page 43, Respecting Me. It says, every form of life is valuable, both new and old. But as a human being, my life is more precious than fine gold. Of all of the billions of people on the earth, it's clear to see that I am special and unique because there is no one else like me. My physical attributes distinguish me from my siblings and classmates, but what makes me different is based on my character traits. It is not only the color of my eyes, skin, and things you see, it's also my thoughts and the choices I make. This is the true me. There is a true saying that as a man thinks, so he is. Therefore, I must be aware of what I'm thinking. Is it negative or positive? Negative thoughts can affect the choices I make. This can lead to regret and put my future at stake. Because I respect myself, I will conform to what is morally right. When there is negative pressure, I will resist with all my might. I choose friends who promote positive moral ways. This is my affirmation. for my youth and for my older days. I therefore make self-respect a part of my character and personality. So I resolve not to do drugs or take part in behavior that is risky. This is how I respect myself. I value being me by treasuring my life, my health, my thoughts, and upholding true morality. So this is a poem, and of course it sounds much better when you have the audio file, but this is a poem that has, it's not just words that will go together and rhyme, but there's a lot of information. There's a whole class and a review just in this poem about self-respect and how it applies to our life and how we're much more than what the eye can see. And of course, our choices will determine what kind of person that we're going to be and what kind of person will we be as contributing to society. If we're a person that makes negative choices, of course, we're going to be a hindrance to society. If we're a person that makes positive choices most of the time, but sometimes we like to do the negative things, we're still going to be somewhat of a hindrance to society. But if we're a person that's striving to make the right choice, even though we might make mistakes, we might fall, pick ourselves back up, well, that's what determines what kind of person we're going to be. And the author of The Peaceful Solution said one time, it's not about how far you fall, but it's about how quick you pick yourself up and how well you're able to recover. And that's what we're truly looking to do. And that's really what self-respect is. You know, David was talking about the difference between self-esteem and self-respect. And of course, self-esteem can be twisted in many different ways to where it's just a point to where you think, well, I'm just better than everybody else. You know, and self-respect is knowing I can be the best that I can be and do the things that I need to do to contribute to society. But of course, at the very top here, where it talks about every form of life is valuable, remember in the very first page, we said that all life is valuable. And turning back over there really quickly, just so I can read it exactly how we said it. And it's the very top of the page. It's a note to the student. It says, does everyone deserve respect? The answer to this question is a resounding yes. In fact, not only do people deserve respect, but so does everything within our environment, regardless of whether it is as small as a pencil or as large as a tree, whether it is alive or dead, yours or someone else's. Respect must be shown. And of course, by now, you should have a line under that word must. It's an ingredient that's required. And it doesn't matter whether a person is just born into this world today or a person is 90, 98 at the end of their life, you know, where you see a person they go through, as you read in the news about people like President Jimmy Carter, who they talk about how he's entered hospice and he's closing out the days of his life. Well, the only thing when he finally passes away, the only thing that'll be remembered is everything he did while he was alive. You know, once you're dead, your decision-making stops. Once you're dead, your ability to contribute to society goes away. So the only time that we can do things to be a benefit to society is the time that we have when we're alive. And of course, health has to be with us also. You can contribute no matter what. But as we get older, we get slower, you know, and we slow down to where we can't do as much as we once used to. But this is where we have to put forth the effort to be a benefit no matter what we do. And notice it says, as a human being, my life is more precious than fine gold. You know, and that is something that you'll see in society that doesn't seem to be working out in today's society. When you think of all of the money and the millions, billions, and trillions of dollars spent on war to annihilate life, to remove life from this planet, it doesn't seem that society would look at life being worth more than fine gold. And of course, when you look at we're being unique individuals, we're all unique individuals, whether you're a twin, and we have a lot of twins in the Peaceful Solution. Here at the headquarters of the Peaceful Solution, we have quite a few pairs of twins, and of course, they're very different. Their personalities are completely different. I know two sets of twins very well. Ones were students of mine and other teachers for many years. We watched them grow up, and two are a pair that I have of my own. And their personalities cannot be more different from each other. They have the same goals in life of wanting to do what is right, But getting there, and of course, the personalities of whether they're outgoing or shy or quiet, these things are very different, even when those who are literally came out together, in the womb together. They can be very different. Even when they look alike, they still can be very different. And of course, you notice it says my physical attributes distinguish me from my siblings and classmates. Yeah, we're all unique individuals, and that's going to change too through life. I remember when I was younger and I was playing sports, I tried my best to gain weight. I did everything that people told me to do. I would eat a jar of peanut butter a day. I didn't care what it took. I was drinking whey protein drinks, anything I could do to gain weight, and I didn't gain a pound. After I hit 35, well, I think all those peanut butter jars and all that stuff I did finally came out all in one day. Because I went from being like 140 to now like 210, and it's the same way now. I can do whatever I want to do, and that won't go away no more. So it's amazing how life changes, and it just didn't take place in the time I would have liked it to change in. And I always thought I wanted to gain weight, and then I realized, no, I really didn't want to gain weight. I'd rather have it back the way it was. The grass is greener on the other side kind of thing. So when you have your physical attributes, of course, there's some things you can't change, your eye color, or at least, you can do certain things these days. It's very bizarre. I've seen it online where people tattooing their eyeballs, but in a common sense kind of way, your eye color, your skin color, your hair color can be changed, but it'll always go back to what it is. And that's going to change too, by the way. It's not going to stay the same forever. And you start seeing that even though you're unique, you're going to go through a phase of changes. And you know what? Those changes are okay. That's part of life. The thing that is going to determine whether you were someone who was a benefit to society isn't whether you gain weight, you lose weight, your hair goes gray, you get wrinkles, you can't run as fast as you used to, you don't have all the money that everyone else has when they got older. That really doesn't determine what kind of person you were throughout your life. When you die, your life isn't measured by how much wealth you left behind. It's really how did you contribute to society and the positivity that you were able to offer people in society. Most people will do a great work in their community. Some people do a great work in their state. The Peaceful Solution has set it up to where we try to connect with everyone around the world. And we try to even move out the language barriers and get rid of those. And with today's technology, things are becoming better to where you can actually have a class in Swahili. And not speak Swahili, but it's being translated for you. And of course, you have to speak slow and you have to pronounce your words correctly, or else it'll get off a little bit. But it's going in the right direction. But no matter whether you're in Africa, if I went to Africa and Somalia or Kenya, I'm going to stick out fairly well. When I travel down to Mexico, I don't stick out as bad. But if I go, into Somalia, I'm going to stick out pretty strongly. I'm not as tanned as they are. But it doesn't change the quality of human being that they are or that I am. No matter what country you go to, the citizenship doesn't determine who you are. Because really citizenship, the quality of citizenship, that the way society examines it, is based on wealth of a country, or the concept of wealth. America is perceived to be very wealthy. We're sure got a lot of debt to be wealthy, but we're perceived that way. And then, of course, it's the hearsay of whether, you could say the word Russia right now, and someone might frown at you. You could say China right now, someone might frown at you. Back in 2001, you could say Afghanistan or any of the Middle Eastern countries, and people would have frowned at you. And these are things that are put into our minds about how these distinguishing attributes that we have because of our birth or where we're from determine what kind of person we are. And of course, that's not true at all. It's the thoughts that are put into our mind and the choices we make that truly determine who we are. And if you notice here in the third part of the poem, it said, there is a true saying that a man thinks so he is. And of course, that's because every action begins with a thought. And if we're a pessimist, as we'll review tonight, and we're always thinking in a very negative way, then all of our actions are going to come out very negative. Negative thoughts can affect the choices I make. This can lead to regret and put my future at stake. You know, there can be a lot of regret in one's life, and the older you become, the more you realize how easy it is to make choices that you will regret. When you're younger, you think, nobody cares. They'll forget about it. Well, the older you get, you start realizing you can remember things that you did when you were, 30 years ago. And the embarrassment, the regret, all of that stuff you can still get the emotions going in the stomach. No, it doesn't really grow away, but did we learn from it? Have we changed? Have we become a better person? Have we developed the ability to not go back to that again? Well, notice in the 4th section here it says, because I respect myself, I will conform to what is morally right. And of course, that means eliminating the things that are detrimental to not only our lives, but also to others. There's nothing wrong with having friends and enjoying each other and having comical times, and there's nothing wrong with forms of joking as long as you're not degrading people. But when you get into doing things that would tear someone else down, usually that's because a person doesn't have a quality of view of themselves. Their self-esteem is low, and they have a lacking of self-respect for themselves even, and therefore in society, when we don't view ourselves in a positive way, we tend to tear everyone else down around us to make ourselves not feel so bad about ourselves. That way, everyone else must be the same way. But of course, here in the last part, it says, I therefore make self-respect a part of my character and personality. That's something that we have to work at. And that's something every day brings its own challenges. And that's one thing to put in the mind of the students. You have to take it day by day. And every day will have its own challenges. And every day will have different challenges. And every country you live in will have different challenges from the next country. We tend to think that here in the United States, if you've never got to know people outside the United States, I would encourage you very much to get to know people in other countries. You'll find out we are a spoiled group of people in the United States, and we have pretty much everything at our fingertips. And you will learn that the things that we have that we take for granted, other people could not even dream of having. And I'll tell you, I was using something. I have an old iPhone. I use Google, and you can hold Google Translate over. And I was reading something in Swahili, and then, of course, I went over to Spanish, and I was trying to read something in Spanish, and the person was asking me, how are you reading it? So I took a picture of my phone translating it. And they sent back, LOL, you use an iPhone 11 to translate. Here, they're unheard of. They're so expensive, no one could imagine having one. And I'm like, wow, this one's an old one. I just kind of just throw it on my desk. And the technology that I was using, they're like, we don't have things that will do that here. But this is something that you kind of think, well, everybody has it. Not everybody has these things. And it's something that we work hard here at the Peaceful Solution headquarters to try to make up for what other people don't have, so everyone gets the ability to learn. And that's one reason why we're on Facebook, and we have our classes streaming live. Turning over to page 44, we're going to take a review through the 2nd chapter, what's already been covered. And of course, looking here at the bottom, we'll get to that first. It says, life is fragile, handle with care. And you see the broken cup there? And we've talked about, wadding up aluminum foil or a piece of paper and throwing it out to the classroom and let them try to get the wrinkles out, because once something's said, it's impossible to erase words. Once you put them in the mind of people, whether they're hurtful, whether you're jesting, whether you're bullying, anything negative affects people, and like I've said before, we always tend to think that, nah, it'll be like water off a duck's back. If I say something, we'll all laugh and everybody moves along. But that's how we view it when we're talking about other people. But what about when those things are said about us? Doesn't go off as well. You got to deal with it. You got to mentally deal with it. And these are things that we can find that will be a huge challenge, that if we don't start learning to treat others the way we want to be treated, the lack of self-respect lets into demoralizing people, tearing people down. judging people by their nationality, determining the quality of person by how wealthy they are or how much they have or how little they have. That really destroys society when we start looking at it that way. When someone walks into school and, well, they don't have the $100 Nikes. They got the $10 shoes you get down here at the Dollar General or at Walmart, if they make a $10 pair of shoes anymore. Some people want to judge people that way and try to determine the quality of person off of what they wear. Well, they don't have the latest, greatest clothes. Well, that doesn't mean they're not the latest, greatest person. That just means they might spend their money a lot more wisely than other people do. But society is a challenging place to live and a challenging place to live in. But we're working together to develop this to be better. Well, here the very first point is self-respect is an important part of building a positive moral character. And going back to page 25, that's where we started chapter 2, respect for myself. And at the very top of the page, it says, I am part of the human race. I belong to the most intelligent life form on the planet. We're supposed to be. I am special and unique, and I am worthy of respect. And of course, self-respect is an important part of building a positive character. Looking here at the first paragraph and re-going over what we started off with, is the greatest thing you can value is life. And remember what values are. We talked about that on page 6 of the character unit. And if you haven't underlined that and referenced it, page 6 of the character unit is where we define values. And of course, a value is something that you deem to be important. And life in itself has to be important. If life isn't important, then everything else pretty much goes out the window. But it says, when you value your own life, you have respect for yourself. Having self-respect will enable you to handle life's challenges in a positive way and avoid making choices that could have a negative impact on your life. So once again, having this self-respect, it enables us. It gives us the ability. It gives us the tool, just one of the tools, but it gives us a tool that is needed to handle life's challenges. And if we don't have respect for ourselves, well, that's kind of one foot in the grave. We're not going to be able to, it's like for those men that like to work on things with wrenches, it's like showing up with a set of metric wrenches when you needed standard wrenches. Or for the women who like to cook, it's like showing up with a bag of salt when you needed a bag of sugar. You have a bag of something that looks similar, or you have tools that look similar, and it will almost work. Well, except for salt and sugar, that's not going to almost work. But when you put these things together, you realize that I really need the right tool. I really need the right ingredients. If I want to get what I'm trying to achieve, I've got to use the right things to accomplish this. And of course, self-respect is a must. It's something we must have. Doesn't mean you walk around thinking you're better than everyone else, or you walk around with your nose stuck in the air, but it does mean you recognize the quality and the value that you share to society, that you can. And of course, it will help you live up to your full potential. Continuing on, it says, developing self-respect is much like a muscle that grows stronger from regular exercise. One of the best ways to start respecting your life is to value it. And of course, once again, that's when we get into it's great to be alive. But the second paragraph, also notice it says, when you learn how to respect yourself, you will have an even greater appreciation of the need to respect others. So the more we work at respecting ourselves, the more that we're going to develop this ability to recognize how important it is to respect others. The combination of respecting yourself and others will enable you to interact in healthy, meaningful ways. And of course, if you can think back, for yourself, if you've ever had a time where you disrespected someone, especially you younger people that are sitting out here in the audience, most of the time, think about your teachers or your parents. Is there ever a time that you actually showed disrespect to an authority figure who, when you think about your parents or your guardian, those are the ones that provide your place you live, the food you eat, the clothes you wear. You kind of bite the hand that feeds you, so to speak. And then when you think about your teachers, well, those are the ones that take out 8 hours a day of their life, 5 days a week, most teachers, and it's usually more than 8 hours a day because they have lesson plans and other things to do once the students are gone. And you're talking about people that literally take their life what they could do anything they want to do, but they focus it on education or helping or building. And sometimes we can take that for granted, and it's something we should never take for granted, having someone who's willing to take the time out of their life that they're never going to get that time back to help other people. That's something we should always not only value that someone would do that, but we should also want to be part of that, want to be able to, what we've received, take what we received and give to others. That's part of the self-respect, is an important part of building positive moral character. Not only expect it to be done for us, but what was done for us, give it to others and help others the same way. Looking at the second point, because a lot of these are going to go together. So we're going to end up reading a lot of things. If we don't combine these, we're going to read them over, because self-respect is an important part of building positive moral character. Also ties into I will value myself as a unique individual. Because of self-respect being important is also recognizing that we're unique individuals. And looking over here to page 26, and at the very top it says, self-respect, know who you are, know what you stand for, and what you value. Self-respect also involves caring about yourself physically and mentally to promote positive growth and development. Now, think about that. When it talks about caring about yourself mentally, physically is one thing. As David covered in the last class, he was talking about personal hygiene, and he even got into bacteria that can grow underneath the skin. Went into some things that I'm sure some people had to quit eating lunch or supper if they were eating it. But he did a great job of expounding and putting it into our minds just how filthy we can be if we're not someone who takes care of ourselves. But of course, when you think about the mental aspect of how we affect people and how our words, going back to the second chapter of the character unit where it talked about, all in the family, and how mental abuse is one thing and physical abuse is another thing, but how words can be more destructive than the actual physical abuse of punching and kicking and hitting, and think about how when these things affect other people mentally, and of course, how do they affect us? For us to speak harshly to someone, for us to tear someone down, to belittle someone, to literally destroy someone with words, well, what does that say about how we think about ourselves if we're willing to do someone else like that? A lot of that comes from disappointment that we might find even in ourselves when we do that to others. But we have to consider how we mentally affect others. And of course, the valuing of ourselves as a unique individual help go along with working it out with other people. But also here, notice it says, why is learning to respect myself important? Well, remember valuing ourselves. We deem ourselves to be important. Here it says the ability to respect yourself is important for your growth and development. And once again, our growth and development. That development is something that every day, with every decision, with every choice, with every thought, that helps it grow. When you're developing something, you look at, if you've ever seen an empty piece of land, I went back to North Carolina where I'm from. I was, hadn't been back there for many years, and I hadn't been back since I think 2018 on business. But when I went back, they had developed the city. They had grown it. Areas that used to be empty, lots were now fully developed. Where there used to be woods that I played as a child, now has a huge restaurant sitting in the middle, almost at the front door of the house that I lived in. Things have changed so drastically that the development, the growth has kind of consumed all of the things I remember as being woods and empty fields, and now even highways going through places that I never even imagined they would go through. Well, our character is supposed to be like that also. And to be honest with you, I've seen a lot of development where I came from. I'm like, I can't believe they ruined that. It doesn't make sense. Now, I wasn't part of the city management team that did that, but they ruined my childhood memories, I can tell you that. I used to like seeing the woods out in front of my house, not a golden corral. That was very different, it's very, very different. But we'll also see that with our character. As it develops, we're going to see some things that we shouldn't let it go that way. We need to kind of reel that back in. We don't have erasers or delete buttons, but we do have things to where when we see cracks in what we've developed, we can go back and fix them. Sometimes it requires a lot of construction where you got to go back from the ground up, and sometimes it just takes a little bit of tweaking to get that to come into compliance with what is beneficial to society. But continuing on here, it says, without self-respect, you could be prone to make choices that can have negative consequences, and many of these choices will come from a need to fit in with friends in order to feel a sense of belonging. Well, when we value ourselves as unique individuals, remember even going back to chapter 4 of the acceptance unit, where what does it take to be friends, and what are you willing to do to be a friend of someone? And then remember what it takes to consider those 4 steps of what it takes to actually accept someone in as a friend. Look back over, because we're going to tie, these 3 are going to be tied in together with the value and the conformity. That way we can get to the 4th one, and we'll kind of separate these out. But looking back to page 44, it says, recognizing that I am a valuable person will help me to avoid negative conformity and peer pressure. Now, notice it says I will value myself as a unique individual. That's accepting who you are. If you're always looking at the next person and you're thinking, man, I would my skin color was like his. I would my arms were as big as his. I was taller. I was shorter. I was fatter, skinnier. I would my hair was blonde instead of black. I would this. I would that. You know what would take place if you could change it? You would do it and go, I hadn't have done that. There's a person that I've met in town, and I've grown, and I say in town in Abilene, a business acquaintance. And it's a very interesting business they have. They do laser tattoo removal. And I wanted them to explain to me how hard and difficult it is to remove a tattoo. Because I don't have tattoos, so I've never gotten one, never had one removed. But I heard it's extremely painful to have it removed. And I said, how many do you get? Oh, we're backlogged, just months and months. You wouldn't believe how many people get a tattoo and then regret it. And you would think that it's the name of someone, but it's the memory of something they're trying to erase. And I said, well, how easy is it to remove? And they said, well, there's tattoos that take place in correctional facilities. They come right off. But a lot of these tattoos, they're in deep. And when you remove them, it's not like an eraser. They said it takes to remove a decent tattoo, can take, depending on the size. And she kind of held up her hand like this, like if someone had one right on their arm. It can take about 10 procedures. And every procedure we burn off with a laser. And she said we literally burn off that skin. And then we burn off another layer. And I said, well, how painful is it? Just most of the time people are crying. They're holding on to stress balls. They're biting on towels, but they are literally crying. It hurts so bad. And I asked them, I said, well, what can be done to make it not painful? Nothing, because you're working around the nerves. There's no way to escape it. So here, and once again, I'm going from what I've been told by people that have tattoos, that it's kind of painful to get a tattoo. But they say it's 100 times worse to get it removed. But yet people still go do it. So they pay to get something, and it hurts. And then they pay to go have it removed that hurts 100 times more. Well, this is what we're going through in society. And of course, not everything can be removed. And that's really the point of valuing ourselves and our decisions. Some things can't be removed. Contracting a disease that David was talking about last class, that can't be removed. Doing something that causes you bodily damage to where you lose a finger, lose a leg, lose something, that can't be removed. Do something as was being expounded, I think William expounded on the drug addictions and the drug abuses and, of course, the abuse of alcohol and then people losing their lives. That can't be removed either. And when you're not respecting yourself as an individual who is unique, you're not respecting other people have families too. And of course, all of these decisions can lead to very horrific mistakes and bad choices. But keeping in mind about the conformity, and let's turn back over to page 26. And in the second paragraph, it says, in fact, that everyone needs friends that are supportive, caring, and accepting of each other. Remember what it means to show acceptance. You know, one form of acceptance is realizing that everyone has a right to choose, whether it's negative or positive. Well, some people choose to do things in life that's extremely unhealthy and brings forth disease. But they have the right to make that choice, but it doesn't mean you have to accept the choice that they make. What we're talking about here are people who are supportive and caring and making positive choices. It is also a fact that the greatest influence to conform comes from friends. Conformity means changing the way you think, feel, and act to fit in. And one of the most common reasons for conformity is peer pressure, and it is a major test of your ability to respect yourself, especially as going back through, and you can go back and watch these classes when it comes into drug abuse or alcohol abuse or even prescription drugs. These things are the very same way. And, you know, we've gotten into society where it's not just you can go get a can of Cool Whip and do something with it that you shouldn't be doing. You can go out and find chemicals out in your dad's garage and do things that you shouldn't be doing, just taking caps off containers and inhaling. You know, as we talked about even back in the very beginning with the character unit, even sniffing glue can be very destructive to the brain. But of course, the self-respect will help you stand up against if someone suggests doing something that is wrong. Continuing on here, it says, by now you're probably thinking, my friends don't pressure me to do anything. I make my own choices. Well, pressure is often subtle. Surely none of your friends force you to act, speak, and dress in a certain way in order to feel as if you belong. However, in order to not feel left out, you might adopt a specific style of dress or way of speaking as a means to fit in with your friends. For example, what type of clothes do you prefer? Do your friends dress the same way? What is the latest slang that is going around the school? You know, and of course, if you're someone that will do things that is derogatory because your friends are doing it. And I was talking with some people the other day. I was in a different country, and of course, they speak a totally different language. And, you know, it's almost like learning curse words is the first word you learn in a different language. I don't know why, but it seems to be here in Texas. Everyone knows how to curse in Spanish. I guess because you hear it so much if you're on job sites. So I'm down on the streets of a certain city, and I hear people cursing like crazy in Spanish. But to me, it doesn't process as a curse word. Now, if they were to say those words in English, it would probably be like, oh, there's going to be a fight or something. Something's going to really be bad here. But in that language, it doesn't really process to me as a curse word. I just kind of hear it as a word. But I could see the people that were talking to each other, they sure took it as curse words. And you see how you can be put in different environments and things can have the same meaning, but you don't really look at it the same way. But keeping that in mind and looking over to page 28, and it's about the dark side of conformity and peer pressure. And remember, these things are subtle. They're not always easily identified. And it says, having friends with whom you are comfortable is an important part of growing up. And for the most part, conformity can be harmless and even positive in some cases. It becomes a problem when you feel pressured to act in a way that could jeopardize your health and safety. And once again, that's anything that could bring harm to yourself, someone else, or the environment. And of course, we have two stories that we read over with Steve's story and Kasha's story. And of course, then you had Just the Facts. And I would encourage everyone to go back and look back at William's class. He taught on this, going through these in detail and showing how these things affect people. And, there's a lot of things where you can say, well, marijuana is legal. You can go somewhere and you can smoke it and there's no problem. That's why it's legal. There's a lot of things that's considered illegal that's deadly and harmful. There's a lot of things that can be used for certain purposes that can't be used for others. And it's a scientific fact and proven fact that marijuana will prohibit your ability to learn. That is a proven fact. It might cause your pain to go away for a short time, but as the author of The Peaceful Solution told us one time, when you have pain, that's your body letting you know there's a problem. Covering the pain up doesn't make the problem go away. You still have the problem. and smoking marijuana might make you less knowledgeable to the problem that you have. But then you get into ecstasy and hellions, and you also have methamphetamines, and you see the drugs that are coming across the border at this time. And as an officer told us in Laredo one time, we don't have a drug war. It's coming across easy. There's no war. They're not fighting to get it across. The only war they have is who's going to buy it on the street, and they're competing against each other who's selling it. It's like having 10 different restaurants there in the main strip, and they're all selling drugs, and everybody's competing to sell you their drug. That's the only war. It's a competition of business. But, thinking about these things about how we recognize that we're valuable and we have to avoid the negative conformity and the peer pressure so we don't fall victim to these things. And looking over here to page 30, at the very top of the page, it says, people who respect themselves will not be pressured into doing something that is morally wrong. Doesn't mean the pressure won't come. It doesn't mean you're not going to experience it, but it means you won't give in to it. And that can come in many different forms. But the end result is negativity. There's a consequence with it. You notice it says, here's the bottom line. Negative conformity in the form of peer pressure can cause you to make choices that you would not make on your own. It means there's something there that's kind of pulling at you to do something you wouldn't normally do. When you choose friends who have positive goals and respect your opinions, you will be less likely to be pressured into doing something that is wrong. If your friends cannot respect your decision, and that's supposed to be a decision that's based on morality, then reevaluate your friendship. You can go back to chapter 4 of the acceptance unit and see, once again, the 4 steps to choosing someone to be your friend. A real friend will encourage you to respect your mind and body by not smoking, abusing drugs and alcohol, or engaging in premarital sex. And a lot of people ask, well, why premarital? Well, we're actually talking about making commitments. It's a scientific fact, and it's a sad fact, that when people do not have relationships based on commitments, they tend to engage with many people, and it spreads disease. That's a scientific fact. So we're actually talking about these relationships that are not made with commitments. When people commit to each other, and they actually value each other, they won't do things, go outside of those relationships to bring in disease. And it's a proven fact also, when people are loyal in relationships, diseases don't grow. They're impossible to spread. But when you go out and you dip your black paintbrush, your paintbrush in the black paint, and you start, slinging the paintbrush around, things are going to become black or white or green or purple. Well, if you take something, we'll say your hand, and you dip it in disease, don't be surprised when you have blisters and sores, and so to speak. And it's not just your hand. I'm just using the hand just to keep this kind of on a family level. But think about having sores and disease and rotten flesh in places you couldn't imagine. And there's nothing you can do to make it go away. I guess you can start cutting flesh off like with cancer, but you're going to find out that your really bad choice lasted you a lifetime. But think about how these decisions that are made, and a lot of teachers ask, why do we use the term premarital? Once again, we're talking about relationships without commitments. Marriage kind of puts a vow into mind that you're going to commit to someone. And notice here you also have disease and the consequences of unwanted pregnancies. And you talk about how they end in abortion. But an unwanted pregnancy is also a person that ends up being a single mother. There's a lot of men that doesn't mind getting women pregnant, and then they disappear. The woman doesn't get to disappear. She doesn't get to walk away. And that's a sad fact of life. And an unwanted pregnancy is also a pregnancy that, you haven't planned for. You had a child, or here comes a child, and you didn't have a commitment involved. So now you find yourself in a society where it's a challenge for a couple to make it, much less a single mother or a single dad to try to get by. That's almost an impossible challenge in society. Think about a society we live in where a dozen of eggs costs $11 now in some states. I've seen where a dozen of eggs, an egg costs more than a ribeye steak now when you break it out by the pound. So it's cheaper to have ribeye steak than it is eggs for breakfast. But once again, do not put aside your self-respect and other positive character traits in order to fit in with the crowd. You know, the crowd might be there and encourage you to make the wrong choice, but the crowd won't be there once the consequences come. The crowd dissipates and leaves. You know, if you've ever seen, everybody's there when the problems are going on, they're bashing things, but when the cops pull up, they disperse. You know, it's like living in a house that has a lot of bugs. You turn on the light and they shoot off everywhere. Why? Well, they know the consequences are coming for their actions. And that's what we see in society. But turning back here to page 44, so we can move on to the next point. Page 44, and on the fourth point, it says, acquiring self-respect will enable me to set positive standards for myself and help me to stand firm on moral choices even when pressured by others. Looking over to page 32, and of course we talked about the peer pressure and we talked about the conformity. And on page 32, we talk about how self-respect can be a part of our character. And of course we talked about acquiring this. And you notice it says evaluating yourself and what is important to you as an individual is essential to achieving self-respect. That's that acquiring we're talking about. Remember, people who have self-respect will not allow others to talk them into doing something that is morally wrong. And notice there's 2 points here. You can begin to acquire self-respect by setting high standards and living up to them. You know, if you set goals and you don't accomplish them, then the goal is pretty much worthless. It's like when you set your alarm clock for 5 o'clock and you hit the snooze button to 7 o'clock, you might as well just not set your alarm for 5 o'clock, just set it for 7 o'clock. You would have slept 2 hours peacefully, and your alarm clock or your cell phone will probably last you a lot longer since you beat it for 2 hours. And I am guilty of doing that too, not for 2 hours, but I've done that myself. Notice you also demonstrate self-respect by being humble and seeking ways to improve yourself. You know, having humility, realizing part of humility, and it's very important to recognize this, is when you see that someone else has made a bad choice or made a mistake, is realizing that we ourselves have done the very same things. Might not be the identical thing, but sometimes when they do stuff, we're like, oh my heavens, I can't believe they did that. And then we can come behind them and do the same thing and go, take place with anybody. You know, it's not that big of a deal. It was a big deal when someone else did it, but when we did it, it's not that big of a deal. You know, I respect myself. I can only expect so much, right? But I expect more from you. That's kind of the confusion we put into society. But also looking over a penny for your thoughts. Well, let's read demonstrate self-respect by being humble and seeking ways to improve yourself first. It says self-respect means accepting that you do not know everything. You know, that might be a shock to all of us, but yeah, not a one of us know everything. I've had children teach me things that I could not imagine. I'm a person that uses coffee creamer, and I had to have I think it was a 9-year-old child at the time, show me that the lid to the coffee creamer itself is actually what you use to get that impossible aluminum foil that's put over the top of the creamer that you couldn't get off. You know, you almost need like a Secret Service mission to remove it. And I had no idea that the lid itself was made to actually open it. But someone showed me. It's kind of like when someone showed me that the tab for the soda can actually was meant to hold a straw. Here I lived my whole life and didn't know anything, but here comes a child and, oh, okay. I knew that. Yeah, I knew that. That day I learned that. But it was embarrassing to see a child learned that in 9 years somehow, and I was 40-something years old and never comprehended it. But notice it says that this is a healthy attitude that will enable you to continue learning new things about yourself. And that's realizing we don't know everything about yourself, others, and the world around you. A humble person is also willing to accept being wrong and learn from his or her mistakes. You know, so that means acknowledging what you've done that's wrong. If we do something that's wrong, if we do something that's wrong to someone else, it's extremely important to contact that person or whatever it is we've done and try to right the wrong. Doesn't mean it's always going to be accepted. It doesn't mean that you can't erase what we've said, can't erase what we've done, but we do have to make the effort to try to fix it. So notice, show respect yourself enough to remain humble and teachable. And of course, teachable is what we have to be, or else we will never move forward in life. Looking back over to page 44 again, page 44, the fifth point, We want to put it together with being an optimistic thinker and using positive self-talk. I am showing respect to myself. I want you to keep that in mind with standing firm on moral choices, even when being pressured by others. And turn over to page 33. You know, when you think about in life, for every positive, there's a negative. For every action, there's a reaction. And you notice here it says a penny for your thoughts. And there's 2 points here. One says that another aspect of developing self-respect is to be aware of your thoughts. And of course, what have you been thinking lately? Are they positive thoughts that help to build and maintain your positive character, or negative thoughts that will make you feel bad about yourself? You can have negative thoughts about other people also, and you'll start thinking negative things about that other person. You know, and you can process these things in your mind, and by the time it's over with, you can create a whole story in your mind that might not have any validity to it. You've just created the most action-packed, non-fictional story a person can imagine, and there'd be no truth to it whatsoever. And when you start making decisions based on that, that's when you're talking about affecting mental capacities. But also notice, negative thoughts will lead to negative self-talk or negative self-criticism. And of course, negative self-talk is when that can lead to a negative self-criticism, can lead to very detrimental things. You know, it can lead to suicide. And I had a person ask me one time, well, if you're talking positive to yourself, isn't that kind of prideful? Well, no. You know, have you ever done something you went, man, I'm glad I got that done. I'm glad it's over. Great job. Everybody does that. And, you know, someone asked me about criticism. Is it positive to be, can you have positive criticism? In the job I do as a interior design custom furniture builder, if you can't take criticism to help make things better, you would never be able to do the job I do. Because I can tell you there's a lot of people that can tell you, no, do it this way, do it that way, do it this way. I think that'd look better. You know, they're criticizing kind of how it looks, but they say, and I tell you, there's people that have eyes that can see things that you do what they say and you're blown away. It's like, yeah, you're right. Yeah, and then some people tell me things, I'm like, I don't know about that. But of course, criticism is not always a negative thing. You know, look it up. There's positive criticism also. Some of the most renowned teachers in history, even theology, taught through pointing out people's failures and mistakes. That's criticism. When someone points out you did something wrong, but they show you how to fix it. When someone shows you did something that's wrong and they don't help you fix it, that's negative criticism. But if someone points out something you did wrong and they show you how to fix it, that's positive. You know, and we have to move in a positive direction. And for every negative, there's a positive, and for every positive, there's a negative. We just have to be choosing the positive sides of it. But looking back to page 44, once again, it says, by being an optimistic thinker and using positive self-talk, I am showing respect to myself. And of course, on page 34, you see the smiling 1 minute and the frowning the next minute, and all that can take place in 30 seconds or less. Optimism, pessimism, and your thoughts. Notice it says also thinking positively is important to how you treat yourself and others. Many people must learn how to be optimistic, positive thinkers. Pessimism, notice here in the second paragraph, pessimism, on the other hand, is a negative character trait. You know, and I think we'll all, if we examine ourselves, we'll find we all have the ability to do both of these very well. We can look at something and when you're dreading something and you don't want to do something, you could think of every bad thing about that, but you're still going to have to do it. You know, and when you're excited and it's something you want to do, you're always thinking positive about it. But this pessimism can lead to negative self-talk. It can lead to procrastination. You know, it can also lead to harming other people. It can lead to failure where there could have been success that was reached very easily. But notice here at the very last paragraph, it says, when interviewed, many people who have had drug and alcohol addictions reported feeling as if they have no reason to be thankful. It's very pessimistic. They hated themselves and they could find no joy in the world around them. As a result, they turned to illegal drugs, alcohol abuse, and premarital illegal sex as ways to solve their problems. And looking over to the think about it, it says becoming optimistic, becoming, that means changing, evolving, developing. Becoming an optimistic, positive thinker takes practice, and more practice. Remember the VIP section in the character unit. Value, imitate, practice. However, you must first become aware of some of the differences between negative and positive thinkers before you can begin training yourself to think positively. And here we had some of the tips here that negative thinkers have, and then, or facts really, and then some of the things that positive thinkers have. And of course, you see the glass here where you consider it half empty or half full. You know, and I had somebody ask me in a school one time, well, I'd be more interested if it was cold or hot. I wouldn't care if it was half empty or half full. I said, well, it's the same concept, you know, whatever you're wanting. If it was a cold day outside, would you prefer warm water? I would. And if it was a hot day, I think I would like cold water. There's a lot of circumstances in life that can dictate and change the decisions we make. But also looking to page 44, the next point, it says, my thoughts affect the way I view myself and others. And we talked about that on page 33 a little bit. And if you look over to page 36, you know, the way I view myself and others, and think about the optimism and the pessimism we just talked about. And here it says, replace those thoughts. No one is immune to having negative thoughts. Everyone must deal with disappointments, setbacks, and making mistakes. You know, that's part of life. If you think you're going to get through life, or if you're a child, you think you're going to get through adulthood without making some mistakes, without making some bad choices, without having some disappointments, you know, what you got to do is limit those things that you experience. It says this is a part of process of growing up. So it's just part of how it's going to work in educating ourselves to do better. Just remember, as long as you continue to build a positive moral character, you can minimize major mistakes that involve taking risks with your health, safety, and well-being. If you make a mistake, however, it does not mean that you're a failure. Don't beat yourself up by saying mean and hurtful things to yourself. You know, that's the negative self-talk and the negative self-criticism. The best way to handle pessimistic thoughts, negative self-talk, and self-criticism is to learn how to replace those thoughts with positive ones. To do this, imagine a big eraser in your mind that simply erases any negative thoughts about yourself as easily as chalk from a chalkboard. If you don't erase the negative thoughts completely on that first few tries, don't give up. Just keep practicing. And you know, David talked about in last class about depression and how you can't look at someone and say, just don't be depressed. You know, that's a process you have to work yourself through. And we had a judge one time that was speaking on behalf of the Peaceful Solution in Laredo, and he was talking about building positive character and how you have to train a person to think differently. And he said it would be compared to someone having cancer. You can't just look at someone and say, don't have cancer. You shall not have cancer. You know, it's the same thing with a negative character. Cancer kind of something you can be stuck with changing your character is something that you can make a difference. Here in the last minute, let's look over to the last bullet point that's there on what I have learned. And it says, by thinking positively and seeking ways to continuously improve myself, I am demonstrating self-respect. And of course, we talked about that on page 34. We talked about that on page 35. And of course, here on page 36, if you look at the very bottom, it says, developing the right thoughts every day can help keep trouble away. And of course, it's talking about every day is a different, just continuously. That's taking it day by day. And of course, I don't want to leave out part of this that is continuously is taking care of yourself physically. That's a daily process. That's something, you know, if you go a couple weeks without brushing your teeth, it's not going to go very well for you. And you know, usually we don't really care about if you're neglecting your dental hygiene. You don't care about it until you have a toothache. And then it's like, oh, I would have took better care of my teeth. And then when you're going to get your tooth cut out, or, you know, I know a person that recently went and they had a crown done. You know, they filed down the tooth and they put one of those $2,000 porcelain crowns on. And then 6 months later, that broke out. They go back to the dentist again and they say, oh, well, we can pull that tooth that you just spent $3,000 on, and we can put an implant that will cost you $5,200. So in the end, you're going to spend almost $9,000 to have one tooth in your mouth that you probably could have made it last longer just by having better hygiene, flossing, you know, doing the things that needed to be done and laying off of sodas and sweet that you thought was a very important part of life every day. But taking care of yourself physically, you know, hygiene-wise, and remember what David said in his class about people that maintain their hygiene have a better self-concept. They have a better outlook. If you've ever traveled somewhere like we have, where you go a day on planes, And then once you get there, you got to travel even more. Some of the best things that you can do is to take a shower and clean up. It makes you feel so much better. If you've ever worked on a farm and you've been out working all day in dirt and manure, coming home and taking a shower makes life better. It makes you feel better, makes you feel accomplished. But also the way you dress. You know, a girl should never be a walking billboard. I know society teaches girls to dress in a certain way to draw attention, but I would that we could develop something so a woman could see what's in the guy's mind that's looking at her. And she would probably dress a lot differently. Because women, I always say, well, I want people to notice me, but I want people to respect me. It would be really neat if we could create something, and also for men, where you could see the thoughts of a person as they're looking at the way you're dressed. I bet you a lot of people, it would probably scare people to death if they could see the process of thoughts going through people's minds, especially when you look at the internet and you realize the majority of websites on the internet deal with pornography. If you took that off, you could cut the internet pretty much into 2/3. And that's what goes through the minds in society. Well, we're going to stop at this point right here. The next class we're going to pick up on chapter 3, which is respecting others. We talked about respecting ourselves, and we're going to get into respecting others. The next class is going to be the 26th. So it'll be 2/26 at 5:30 p.m. Thank you for joining us once again.